Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's to really plunge into the source material you shared with us.
That's right.
We want to uncover the essential knowledge, maybe some surprising facts, and definitely the different perspectives on those pivotal events of 1857 in India.
We're aiming to cut through the noise, focusing just on what these sources reveal.
Exactly. To give you the clearest possible picture based on this material.
Think of us as guides, sort of through this rich historical landscape presented in the documents.
Yeah.
We're taking what you provided, the articles, the research, the notes, and just pulling out the most important insights.
Helping you see not just what happened, but maybe why it mattered, according to these specific accounts.
Precisely.
Okay, so where better to begin than with that dramatic spark, the thing that ignited it all?
Meerut.
Yes, the sources take us straight to Meerut, late afternoon, Leap 10th, 1857. The sepoys there. They broke out.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't contained.
No. It started in the infantry lines, then jumped to the cavalry, and then incredibly quickly swept right into the city itself.
And that's where ordinary people joined in the fray.
Right.
And this was, more than just some military indiscipline. The moment they mutinied, the rebels really showed their intent.
How so?
Well, according to the sources, they immediately seized the bell of arms. That's where the weapons were stored.
Oh, okay.
Then attacked white people and started ransacking, burning bungalows, property.
And it wasn't just private homes either, was it?
No. They went after the symbols of British authority.
Like what?
Government buildings, the record office, the jail, the court, post office, treasury, all destroyed, plundered.
Wow. That's a powerful statement.
Definitely. And one of the most telling actions, cutting the telegraph line to Delhi.
Right. Isolating the capital.
Sending a clear signal, or rather not sending one.
Yeah.
And as darkness fell that same day, a group of those Meerut sepoys were already heading towards Delhi.
On horseback.
Yes. Riding through the night, they reached the gates of the Red Fort early the next morning, May 11th. It was during Ramzan.
And the old Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah, he was there.
He was. Just finishing his morning prayers, apparently, when the sepoys gathered under his window.
What did they tell him?
They said they'd come from Meerut after killing the Englishmen there.
And their reason? Did they state one?
They did. They claimed they were being forced to bite cartridges for the new rifles.
The infamous cartridges.
Exactly. The ones they believed were coated with the fat of cows and pigs.
Which, they argued, corrupted the faith of both Hindus and Muslims.
Precisely. And what the sources really make clear is that this wasn't just a sepoy thing in Delhi.
How do you mean?
Well, other sepoys entered the city, but crucially, the ordinary people of Delhi joined them.
Okay.
Large numbers of Europeans were killed, and then the rich of Delhi were attacked and looted too. Within hours, Delhi was effectively out of British control.
It happened that fast.
According to these accounts, yes. And here's where it gets really interesting based on the descriptions. The scene inside the Red Fort.
Go on.
The sepoys just rode in, completely ignoring the usual, very elaborate court etiquette.
Really? Just bypassed it all.
Yeah. They went right up to Bahadur Shah and demanded his blessing for what they'd done.
His blessing? What did he do?
Well, surrounded by them, the sources suggest Bahadur Shah didn't have many options. He complied. And that gave the revolt this critical layer of legitimacy.
How so?
By having the uprising carried out in the name of the Mughal emperor, even if his initial support was, reluctant.
It gave them a figurehead.
A central symbolic figure the rebels could rally around.
Okay, let's dive deeper into the sources then. Once the news spread that Delhi had fallen, which it did incredibly quickly, right? Around May 12th, 13th.
Yeah, very fast.
Things just moved like wildfire across North India. The documents show cantonment after cantonment rising in mutiny.
All across the Gangetic Valley, west of Delhi, too. And if you look at the timing, the sequence presented in these accounts, it really does suggest a kind of ripple effect.
News travels town to town, and then bang.
Pretty much. News arrives, sepoys rise up. What's striking is how similar the pattern of rebellion was in so many places.
Almost like they were following a plan.
Or at least a similar model. The sources describe it often starting with some kind of signal, maybe the evening gun or a bugle call.
Okay. And then?
Then seize the bell of arms, get the weapons, plunder the treasury, get the funds.
Makes sense. Arms and cash first.
Exactly. After that, attack and burn government buildings.
The symbols again.
Right. The jail, treasury, telegraph office, record room, specifically burning records.
Destroying the evidence of British administration.
Seems like it. According to the sources, everything and everybody connected with the Farangi became a target.
Ah, Farangi. The source defines that, doesn't it?
It does. A term, possibly from Frank, often used, sometimes derogatorily, in Urdu and Hindi for foreigners.
A clear identifier for the other,
Yeah.
the enemy.
Yes. And the rebellion wasn't just hating British people or property. The sources mention rebels putting up proclamations.
In multiple languages.
Hindi, Urdu, Persian. And they explicitly called for Hindus and Muslims to unite against the Faranges.
Unity was a key theme then.
It seems so. And this is a key insight the sources highlight.
Yeah.
This is the point where a Sepoy mutiny really transformed into something broader, a popular rebellion.
Because ordinary people joined in.
Exactly. And when they did, the targets expanded significantly.
Mm-hmm.
In major towns like Lucknow, Kanpur, Bareilly, moneylenders and the rich were also attacked.
Why them?
Peasants often saw them not just as local oppressors, but also as allies of the British. Their houses were frequently looted, destroyed.
So this wasn't just about cartridges anymore, not by a long shot.
No, it quickly became this general defiance of established authority, of hierarchy.
And the British response.
For a period, May and June 1857, they were completely stunned. As one British officer quoted in the sources put it, their rule just collapsed like a house made of cards.
Wow. But was it all chaos? Or was there some coordination?
Well, what's fascinating here, and another key insight from the sources, is the evidence suggesting it wasn't purely spontaneous. There are indications of planning and coordination.
Really? Like what?
The sources point to communication between sepoy lines. There's a specific example given.
Go on.
The 7th Dawad irregular cavalry refused the new cartridges early in May. Then they apparently wrote to the 48th Native Infantry.
What did they say?
Something like they had acted for the faith and awaited the 48th's orders.
Awaited orders. That does sound like coordination.
A powerful clue, yeah. Suggests deliberate communication, maybe a shared understanding or timetable. The sources also mention sepoys or emissaries moving between different stations, spreading the message, talking about what was happening.
Like messengers.
Could be. And there's that anecdote about Francois System.
Oh, yeah, the native Christian police inspector. Tell us about that again.
Okay, so he's in Saharanpur, dressed in local clothes. A Muslim Tahsildar, that's a revenue official from Bijnor, comes in.
Right.
Learns Sistan is from Awadh, and asks him, what news from Awadh? How does the work progress, brother?
The work.
Sounds coded.
It does. And Sistan's careful reply, if we have work in Awadh, your highness will know it.
Okay.
Then the Tahsildar confidently says, depend upon it. We will succeed this time. The direction of the business is in able hands.
Wow. And this Tahsildar was later identified as?
A principal rebel leader, yes. This exchange, as presented in the sources, strongly suggests covert communication, a shared sense of purpose between people in different places.
So plans were being made, discussed. But who was driving it? The sources don't point to one single leader, do they?
Not really a central command, no. But they do point towards the sepoys themselves as the makers of their own rebellion.
How do they make decisions then?
Well, the sources offer a clue with the mention of panchayats.
Like councils.
Exactly, like village councils, but within the army. There's an incident mentioned where a dispute between military, police, and infantry was decided by a panchayat of native officers from each regiment.
And Charles Ball, an early historian, cited in the sources, noted that these panchayats were apparently happening nightly in the Kanpur sepoy lines.
Nightly meetings. That's a crucial insight.
It suggests collective decision-making among the sepoys.
Which makes sense, given they all live together.
Right. Living in the lines, sharing a lifestyle, often similar caste backgrounds. The sources say it's plausible they were sitting together, debating, deciding what to do.
Okay, so they're making decisions. But to actually fight the British, you need organization, leadership.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And the rebels, well, they sometimes turned to people who had held authority or respect before the British took over.
Which explains why they went to Bahadur Shah in Delhi.
Yes. The sepoys appealed to him to take the lead, though the sources suggest his first reaction was horror and rejection.
So he wasn't keen initially.
Doesn't sound like it. He only seems to have accepted, maybe under duress, when the sepoys actually forced their way into the Red Fort.
And elsewhere. Was it a similar pattern?
Often, yes. In Kanpur, the sources say the sepoys and local people basically gave Nana Sahib.
The adopted son of the last Peshwa.
That's him. They gave him no choice save to join the revolt as their leader.
Interesting. And the Rani of Jhansi.
A celebrated figure now, of course, but we're told she was initially forced by the popular pressure around her to take up arms.
So pressure from below played a role.
Seems like it. Same with Kunwar Singh, a local zamindar in Ara, Bihar. He emerged as a leader responding to local demands.
And in Nawad, the Nawab had just been exiled.
Yes, Wajid Ali Shah. His memory was still very raw. The sources say when British rule fell there, the people celebrated by hailing his young son, Burjis Qatar, as their leader.
So tapping into that loyalty to the old rulers.
Definitely. But the sources are also clear that leadership wasn't just the traditional elites, kings, queens, zamindars.
Oh, who else?
The message of rebellion was also carried, and sometimes led, by ordinary men and women, and significantly, by religious figures.
Religious leaders.
Yeah. From Meerut, there were reports of a fakir, a sort of holy mendicant, riding an elephant, who sepoys often visited. And in Lucknow, especially after Awadh was annexed, religious leaders and even self-styled prophets were preaching the destruction of British rule.
So religion was a powerful motivator.
Undeniably.
Wow.
And we also find these powerful local leaders emerging, driven by very specific regional grievances.
Like who?
The sources highlight Shah Mal. He mobilized Jats villagers in the Beirut area of Uttar Pradesh.
What was his main issue?
He was specifically fighting against the really oppressive British land revenue system. It was squeezing the farmers hard.
Tell us more about him. He sounds interesting.
He is. Shah Mal, the sources detail, mobilized the headmen and cultivators of the Sharasi days. That means 84 villages.
84 villages? How did he do that?
He moved around at night, apparently village to village, urging people to rebel.
And who did he target?
His uprising went after local moneylenders and traders, seen as British collaborators, but also directly attacked symbols of British power, government buildings, destroyed the bridge over the river Yamuna, even dug up the metalled roads the British had built.
Really hitting the infrastructure.
Yeah, taking on the symbols of Farangi Raj. The sources mention he sent supplies to the Delhi sepoys, cut official communication lines.
He sounds like he set up his own administration.
Pretty much. She established his own Hall of Justice in an English officer's bungalow, built an intelligence network. For a time, he was locally known as the Raja.
The Raja. So people felt British rule was over.
In his area, yes, they genuinely felt their own rule had begun.
Incredible. Any other key leaders mentioned?
Another key religious leader noted is Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah, often called Danka Shah, the Maulvi with the drum.
What did he do?
He preached jihad, holy war against the British, moved around with his followers, apparently causing quite a panic among British officials.
Why the panic?
Well, many saw him as an inspired prophet, which gave him immense authority. Some even thought he was invincible.
Wow. Did he fight?
He did. He played a significant military role, fighting against the British commander Henry Lawrence in the Battle of Chinhat.
Okay, so diverse leadership. But what was driving the ordinary people? The sources really emphasize rumors and prophecies, don't they?
Absolutely. They were a potent force, maybe the most potent force, in motivating action.
The greased cartridge rumor being the most famous?
Of course. Sepoys arriving in Delhi told Bahadur Shah the bullets were coated with cow and pig fat, violated their religious beliefs, their caste rules.
And this was about the new Enfield rifle cartridges.
Yes, the ones you had to bite or tear open before loading.
Did the sources say where that rumor started?
They trace one version back to an incident reported in January 1857 at Dum Dum near Calcutta.
What happened?
A reported argument between a low-caste Khalasi, a laborer, and a Brahmin sepoy. The sepoy objected to the Khalafi touching his water pot.
Because of caste rules.
Right. And the Khalasi supposedly recorded that the Brahma would soon lose his caste anyway by biting cartridges greased with cow and pig fat.
Oof. Whether that exact story is true or not.
Exactly. Whether it was the literal spark or just captured the mood, the rumors spread like wildfire through the sepoy lines.
And the British couldn't stop it.
The sources show that no amount of explanation or assurance worked. They even tried changing the grease, but the belief stuck.
But it wasn't the only rumor flying around, was it?
No, not at all. Others circulated, like a widespread fear that the British were plotting this gigantic conspiracy to destroy both Hindu and Muslim caste and religion.
Ow!
By mixing bone dust of cows and pigs into the flour, the atta, sold in the markets.
Bone dust in the flour, that's intense.
It was. The fear was so strong that sepoys and common people refused to touch the atta. There was just pervasive anxiety about forced conversion to Christianity.
These deep-seated fears really spurred people to action then.
Definitely. And they were reinforced by a prophecy that was circulating.
What prophecy?
That British rule, established after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, would end exactly on the centenary of that battle.
June 23rd, 1857.
Precisely. Adds a kind of fateful element to it all.
And then there's that really strange story about the chapatis.
Ah, yes, the mystery of the chapati distribution. Unleavened bread being passed from village to village.
How did that work again?
A watchman makes 5 chapatis, keeps one, passes the others to the next watchman who does the same. On and on.
And what did it mean, did the sources say?
They admit the meaning isn't clear, even today. But people at the time interpreted it as an omen of an upheaval, a signal that something big was coming.
So rumors, prophecies, mysterious signals. Why were people so ready to believe them?
And here's the crucial insight the sources offer. It wasn't just about whether these things were factually true.
Okay.
The reason people believed them and acted on them is because they resonated so deeply with fears and suspicions that had already been building for decades.
Fears stemming from what?
Stemming directly from British policies pursued since the late 1820s.
Policies aimed at?
At reforming Indian society, using Western ideas, Western institutions, things like introducing English schools, colleges.
Passing laws like abolishing sati, or permitting widow remarriage.
Exactly. Things that challenged existing social and religious norms.
And the annexations. That must have created huge distrust.
Hugely significant. Kingdoms like Awadh, Shansi, Satara, taken over by the British on various pretexts, misgovernment, or refusing to allow adoption.
And once annexed?
The British imposed their own systems, their administration, their laws, and particularly these new land settlement and revenue collection methods.
Which often disrupted everything.
Precisely. So the cumulative impact, as the sources portray it, was immense. It felt like everything people cherished, their kings, their customs, their landholding patterns, was being systematically dismantled.
Replaced by what?
Replaced by something impersonal, alien, and often deeply oppressive.
And you mentioned Christian missionaries.
Yes, their increasing activities further aggravated this feeling, fueling those fears of forced conversion.
So it created this climate of intense suspicion.
Exactly. A volatile climate where rumors found incredibly fertile ground and could spread with lightning speed, acting as triggers for rebellion.
Okay, let's zoom in on one area the sources identify as a major center, a real hotbed, Awadh.
Right. Lord Dalhousie, the Governor General, called it a cherry that will drop into our mouth one day, back in 1851.
And 5 years later, 1856, they annexed it.
They did. But the conquest of Awadh, the sources show, wasn't sudden. It happened in stages.
How so?
It really started with the subsidiary alliance forced on the Nawab back in 1801.
What did that do?
It effectively stripped him of his army, made him totally dependent on the British resident for protection, and unable to control his own local chiefs, the Tulukars.
So it weakened him considerably.
Made him powerless, essentially.
Right.
A crucial first step for the British.
And they had economic interests there too, right?
Oh, yes. Awadh's fertile land was perfect for growing cash crops like indigo and cotton. Plus, its location made it a valuable market.
So by 1856, with most of India already under their control?
Annexing Awadh was kind of the final piece, completing this nearly century-long process that began way back with Bengal.
And the annexation itself, deposing the Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, that was huge.
Massive turning point. He was exiled to Calcutta on the plea of misgovernment.
But the British thought he was unpopular.
They assumed he was, yes, but the sources actually state the opposite. He was apparently widely loved.
Really?
Yeah. Many people followed him in mourning as he was taken away, singing songs of grief.
That's powerful. The sources capture that emotion, don't they?
They do. There are quotes like an observer saying, "The life was gone out of the body, and the body of this town had been left lifeless."
Wow.
And a folk song cited laments, "The honorable English came and took the country." This wasn't just politics, it was felt personally.
And the material impact.
Huge. When the Nawab's court was dissolved, countless people lost their livelihoods.
Who are we talking about?
Musicians, dancers, poets, artisans, cooks, retainers, court officials. A whole ecosystem depended on that court. Suddenly, gone.
So for many in Awadh, Firangiraj wasn't just new government.
It truly meant the end of a world, a breakdown of everything they valued. Relationships, ways of life.
And this created a chain of grievances linking different groups.
Absolutely. From the deposed prince and the powerful Talagwar, right down to the ordinary peasant and the sepoy recruited from the villages.
So the revolt in Awadh became this expression of popular resistance.
A powerful one, yes. Resistance to this alien order that had just dismantled their entire world.
You mentioned the Talatars. They were hit hard, too.
Definitely. These were powerful landed elites. They controlled vast lands, had their own armed retainers, even forts.
And the British didn't like that.
Not at all. Saw them as rivals. Immediately after annexation, they set about disarming their retainers, destroying their forts.
Taking away their power base.
Exactly. And then came the British land revenue policy, the summary settlement of 1856. That was another major blow.
Why? What was the idea behind it?
It was based on the assumption that these Talukars were basically interlopers, that they'd grab their power through force and fraud.
So the British wanted to remove them.
Wherever possible, yes.
Yeah.
They aimed to settle the land directly with the cultivators or village communities.
And the result?
Dramatic, according to the figures cited. Talukdar holdings plummeted. Before the British, they controlled maybe 67% of villages. After the settlement, just 38%.
Wow, that's a massive shift.
Especially hard-hit in southern Awad.
But the British said they wanted to help the peasants, right? Reduce exploitation.
That was the stated aim. Reduce exploitation, settle land with owners, increase state revenue.
But the reality
was different. Revenue demands actually increased significantly. The sources mention overassessment of 30-70% in some places.
70%.
And the British collection system was rigid, inflexible, so the burden on the peasants didn't decrease. It often got worse.
So the policy backfired on multiple levels.
You could say that. Plus, dispossessing the Talukars broke down the traditional social order. While Talukars could be oppressive, sure, the sources note many also provided some patronage, maybe appeared generous sometimes, offered relief in hard times.
A sort of buffer.
Perhaps. The British system, in contrast, exposed peasants directly to harsh revenue demands. No intermediary, no traditional safety net.
This brings us back to that amazing quote from Hanwant Singh, the Raja of Kalakankar.
Ah, yes, source 4. He saved a British officer, but then
tells him, Sahib, your countrymen came into this country and drove out our king.
Powerful stuff.
You sent your officers to examine the titles to the estates. At one blow you took from me lands which from time immemorial had been in my family.
The sense of injustice is palpable.
The people of the land rose against you. You came to me whom you had despoiled. I have saved you. But now I march at the head of my retainers to Lucknow to try and drive you from the country.
That quote just captures the depth of the resentment, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's not just about the land, is it? It's tied to the removal of their king, the sense of dishonor, the arbitrary seizure of ancestral property.
And when he says the people of the land, who does he mean?
He's referring to the locals, likely including the very peasants and villagers who were also suffering under this new British system.
So his anger reflects both personal and collective losses.
Absolutely. The exile of their ruler, the confiscation of lands that defined their status, their wealth, it all fueled this anger.
And it helps explain that remarkable unity we see in Awad during the revolt.
Exactly. Peasants and Talukars fighting together, many rallying loyal to Begum Hazrat Mahal, the Nawab's wife who stepped up to lead.
Which leads us to another crucial connection the sources keep emphasizing.
The Sepoy rural link.
Yes, the deep ties between the soldiers and the villages of North India, especially Awad.
That's a key insight, definitely. A huge majority of the Bengal Army Sepoys came from the villages of Awad and eastern UP.
Often upper castes?
Yes, many were Brahmins or other upper castes. Awad was famously called the nursery of the Bengal Army.
Nursery of the Bengal Army, because so many recruits came from there.
Precisely. And because of this, what happened in the villages, those perceived threats to family life, the new land settlements, the anxieties about British intentions.
All that news traveled quickly back to the Sepoy lines.
Instantly. And vice versa. The Sepoys' fears about the cartridges, their complaints about leave, or racial abuse from officers.
That news went straight back home to the villages.
It was a constant feedback loop, a two-way street.
So when the Sepoys rebelled, they weren't just isolated soldiers.
Or from it. They were swiftly joined by their relatives, their neighbors, the wider rural community. Peasants poured into towns, joining the soldiers and urban rebels.
That rural Sepoy connection was absolutely vital then.
Crucial to the widespread nature and the sheer intensity of the uprising.
Okay, so we have a sense of the causes, the spread, the connections, but what did the rebels actually want?
That's one of the trickiest questions, partly because, as the sources point out, we have very few records written by the rebels themselves.
Most of what we know comes from
British accounts, which inevitably have their own biases, their own perspectives.
So we rely mainly on rebel proclamations, the ishtihars.
Yes, those are key. And what these documents consistently reveal is this vision of unity.
Unity across
Across all sections of the population. Regardless of caste or creed, they repeatedly appealed to everyone to join the fight.
Even proclamations from Muslim leaders addressed Hindus?
Yes, they were careful to address Hindu sentiments, framing the rebellion as a war where both communities had a shared stake against the British.
Interesting. So they looked back to the past.
Frequently glorified a pre-British past, emphasizing a perceived era of coexistence under the Mughals.
Like the Azamgar Proclamation, Source 5.
Exactly. That one appealed to people to fight under the standards of both Muhammad and Mahavir, a Jain Tirthankara, symbolizing that Hindu-Muslim unity.
And did that unity hold? Did the British try to break it?
Oh, they definitely tried. The sources mentioned an example in Bareilly where the British spent 50,000 rupees trying to incite Hindus against Muslims.
50,000. Did it work?
Apparently not. That religious unity largely held firm during the crucial period of the uprising.
Okay, let's look closer at that Azamgar Proclamation from August 1857. What does it tell us?
Well, it sets a general tone first. Describes the British as infidel and treacherous, says they've ruined the people, frames the rebellion as a duty, fight for religion, fight for the public good.
Right, then it gets specific.
Very specific. Lays out grievances and demands for different groups.
Like the Zemindars, the landowners.
Yes, they're grievances. Exorbitant revenue demands the Jumas, loss of dignity, estates being auctioned off, being subjected to low-status people in court, taxes for things like schools, hospitals, roads.
Things they saw as imposed. And what did they want?
Like Jumas, their dignity restored, and absolute rule in their own zemindari under restored Badshahi government Mughal rule.
Okay. What about merchants?
Their complaint was the British trade monopoly, profits being taxed, the risk of imprisonment. They wanted free trade, buy land and water, and to support the Badshahi government.
And public servants, people working for the British.
Their grievances were low respect, poor pay, no real influence, and the fact that top posts were exclusively for Englishmen.
So they wanted
Higher salaries, access to high posts under the Badshahi government.
Yeah.
More respect, more power.
artisans too. They had complaints.
Yes, they felt ruined by cheap English imports flooding the market. They wanted exclusive employment by kings, rajas, the rich, basically, patronage restored under the Badshahi government.
And the religious figures, pundits and fakirs.
As guardians of religion, they saw the British as direct enemies of both Hindu and Muslim faiths. They wanted people to join the holy war.
So, looking at all these demands together, what's the core insight?
It's a comprehensive rejection of British rule. They're Farangi Rai.
Condemning everything.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Annexations, broken treaties, disruptive land settlements, foreign commerce taking over. Fundamentally, they wanted to restore a familiar world, a cherished world they felt the British had destroyed.
And that deep fear about religion and caste being destroyed, that was central.
Absolutely central to motivating people. You see it in the Sepoys' own petition, their RC, Source 6.
What does that say?
It explicitly states their loyalty was broken by the cartridge issue and that rumor about bone dust in the flour. They say they were fighting for the preservation of our faith.
It's interesting to compare that to the Tolukar's reason, Hanwant Singh.
Yes. The Sepoy emphasizes faith being polluted. The Tolukar focuses on the British driving out their king and taking his land.
Shows the multiple layers of motivation, doesn't it?
Exactly. People were fighting for livelihood, faith, honor, identity, all framed within this idea of a greater public good.
And while the official proclamations stressed unity.
Right. Focused on unifying different groups by promising a return to a kind of pre-British hierarchy.
There were also attacks on local figures.
Yes. The sources note attacks on moneylenders, other perceived British allies. This suggests maybe a more complex undercurrent.
Like,
Maybe a glimpse of a desire to overturn some existing hierarchies. A potentially more egalitarian vision. Though that wasn't the main message in the formal calls for unity.
okay. So, once British rule collapsed in places like Delhi, Lucknow, Kanpur, did the rebels try to set up their own governments?
Yes, they did try to establish alternative structures of authority.
What were they aiming for?
The sources suggest they were trying to restore something like the pre-British 18th century world they knew.
How do they go about it?
They made appointments to administrative posts, tried to organize revenue collection, arrange pay for their troops, issued orders to stop looting, planned battles, established chains of command.
Basically recreating the systems they were familiar with.
Exactly, Mughal or princely state systems. However, the sources note these structures were often pretty short-lived,
Why?
mainly due to the intensity of the British counteroffensive. Except perhaps in Awadh, where rebel planning and administration seem to have lasted a bit longer.
Right. Which brings us to the British response. Putting this down was not easy for them.
Abundantly clear from the sources. Far from it. They responded with overwhelming, often brutal force.
What measures did they take?
In May and June 1857, they passed a series of really draconian laws, effectively put much of North India under martial law.
Meaning?
Military officers, even ordinary Britons, were given sweeping powers to try and punish anyone suspected of rebellion. Death was often the only sentence. Ordinary legal processes just went out the window.
So sheer military force.
Armed with these new powers and getting reinforcements from Britain, they began the suppression. The sources highlight how symbolically important Delhi was.
Which they recaptured when?
Late September 1857, after really protracted heavy fighting. The rebels defended the capital fiercely.
But elsewhere, in the countryside.
The reconquest across the Gangetic Plain was slow, difficult, incredibly violent. The sources describe having to take back areas literally village by village.
Why so difficult?
Because the population was entirely hostile, as one source puts it.
So the British realized it wasn't just a mutiny.
That's when they fully grasped, according to these accounts, that they were dealing with an uprising that had attracted huge popular support.
Is there an estimate of that support?
A British official named Forsyth, cited in the sources, estimated that in Awadh alone, something like 3/4 of the adult male population was actively involved in the rebellion.
3/4. No wonder it took so long to suppress.
Bringing Awadh fully under control required protracted fighting well into March 1858.
Did they only use military force? Or other strategies, too?
They used immense military power, yes, but also political strategies.
Such as?
Well, in areas like Uttar Pradesh, where landholders and peasants had united against them, the British tried to break that unity.
How?
By promising to give confiscated estates back to landholders who stayed loyal, while making sure those who rebelled would be permanently dispossessed. Divide and rule, essentially.
Okay. Finally, how do we actually know all this? What are the sources?
As we've touched on, direct rebel records are scarce. Our understanding relies very heavily on British accounts.
Like official records.
Official records, letters, diaries, histories written afterwards, newspaper reports from the time.
Mostly from one side, then.
Largely, yes. But the sources emphasize another incredibly important type of record. Pictorial images.
Pictures.
Yes. Paintings, drawings, etchings, posters, cartoons, popular bizarre prints, produced during and immediately after the revolt by both the British and Indians.
And these images tell a different story.
They're crucial for understanding the emotions, the perspectives of the time. They reveal a lot.
Okay, let's look at the British images first. What did they typically show?
Well, many celebrated their saviors, British heroes. Thomas Jones Barker's painting, The Relief of Lucknow from 1859, is a prime example.
What does that depict?
It commemorates the British forces breaking the long siege of the Residency building in Lucknow.
And how is it depicted? The sources describe the composition.
They do. The British heroes Campbell, Outram, Havelock are central, bathed in light. The damaged Residency is behind them. Triumphant horses symbolize British power being re-established.
Are the costs shown?
Yes, there are dead and injured figures in the foreground acknowledging the cost. But the overall message, the source says, was really one of reassurance and triumph for the British public back home.
Okay. What other themes appear in British images?
Another powerful set of images responded to reports often exaggerated of violence against British women and children.
And the purpose of those?
They seemed designed to fuel outrage and demands for harsh revenge. In Memoriam, by Joseph Noel Peyton from 1859.
What does that show?
Helpless women and children huddled together looking fearful. It strongly suggests impending violence, dishonor, death.
And they're rebels.
They're depicted as invisible or maybe just brutish shadows. It's contrasted with the arriving British rescuers. The painting's intent, the sources argue, was clearly to provoke anger and fury.
But British women weren't always shown as helpless victims.
No. Interestingly, images like Miss Wheeler defending herself showed women as heroic figures single-handedly fighting off attackers.
And the attackers are shown how?
Often demonized rebels, yeah. And these pictures sometimes framed the conflict as a religious battle, too, maybe showing a Bible prominently displayed, saving Christianity.
This outrage and call for vengeance, did it lead to images justifying repression?
Explicitly so. Cartoons and magazines like Punch showed, say, an allegorical figure of justice trampling on sepoys, or the British lion's vengeance on the Bengal tiger.
What did those symbols mean?
The lion, Britain, attacking the tiger, representing India, often with figures of helpless women and children nearby, implicitly justifying the lion's brutality.
And the executions, were they depicted?
Yes, the sources include descriptions and depictions of the incredibly brutal executions, often public spectacles.
Like being blown from guns.
Exactly. Images like blowing from the guns in the Illustrated London News show it almost like a theatrical performance, a public display of brutal power meant to instill terror.
Terror in who?
Both the soldiers forced to watch and the wider population. Similarly, images of mass hangings, multiple rebels hanging from one gallows, underscored this wasn't routine punishment. It was a performance of terror.
What about moderation? Was there any call for that?
There was some. Governor General Canning suggested a degree of leniency after the fighting.
How was that received?
He was mercilessly mocked back home. Punch magazine called him Clemency Canning, often drew him protecting a sepoy who was still holding bloody weapons, mocking his perceived softness.
Okay, so that's the British perspective and images. What about the Indian side? How is 1857 remembered there?
Well, decades later, the sources show the Indian nationalist movement drew heavily on the memory of 1857. They reinterpreted it, celebrated it.
As what?
As the first war of independence, a unified struggle by all sections of Indian society against foreign rule.
And how did they keep that memory alive?
Art and literature played a vital role, presenting the rebels not as mutineers, but as heroes fighting oppressive rule.
Any specific figures stand out?
The Rani of Jhansi became an absolute icon in this nationalist imagery.
How is she depicted?
Often as a masculine warrior, fighting fiercely with a sword, riding a horse into battle. The sources quote that famous line from Subhadra Kumari Chauhan's poem.
Which one?
Like a man she fought, she was the Rani of Jhansi. Popular prints showed her in battle armor. She became this powerful symbol of resistance to injustice.
So these images, British and Indian, they weren't just reflecting feelings.
No. The sources show they actively shaped feelings and sensibilities. The British images helped justify the repression back home. The nationalist images helped forge a collective Indian identity in the later struggle for independence.
Examining these visual sources alongside the texts gives us different windows then.
Different, often conflicting windows into how the revolt was experienced, perceived, and crucially, how it was remembered by both sides.
Ooh, okay. That really was a deep dive into the sources you shared.
They covered a lot of ground.
And what we've uncovered really highlights the sheer complexity of 1857. It wasn't just a military mutiny, was it?
No, clearly a widespread popular rebellion, rooted in so many diverse, interconnected grievances.
Religious fears, stoked by those potent rumors, anxieties about conversion.
Economic hardship from new land settlements, disruption of livelihoods.
Loss of status and power for elites.
And just this overarching sense that an alien system was destroying a familiar, cherished world.
And we've seen how different sections of society got involved. Sepoys, peasants, talukars, religious leaders, former royals.
Sometimes leading willingly, sometimes maybe pressured into joining.
And the sources give intriguing hints of planning and communication, too.
Yes, challenging the idea it was all just spontaneous chaos.
And this complex uprising was met with an equally complex and brutally effective response from the British.
Overwhelming military power, harsh laws, political strategies like trying to divide landholders and peasants.
They eventually recognized the popular support it had, especially somewhere like Awadh.
Perhaps belatedly, yes.
Yeah.
They realized the depth of it.
And while our access to the rebel perspective is limited, mostly filtered through British accounts,
by carefully examining the rebel proclamations and these different forms of representation like paintings and cartoons,
we can still piece together some of their motivations, their goals, and just the multiple, often conflicting perspectives that shaped this absolutely pivotal event in history.
It's about reading between the lines sometimes.
Right. So here's something to consider as you continue processing all this information. How do historical events actually get remembered and narrated, often decades, even centuries later? How do those starkly different visual representations of 1857, the British ones versus the Indian nationalist ones, how do they continue to shape perceptions and understandings of this period today?
That's a great question.
What does that tell you about the enduring power of images, of narratives, in constructing how we understand the past? Something for you to mull over as you continue your own learning journey.